Historically, when you talk about like the Revolutionary War, everyone's the Tea Party and the no taxation without representation, but what got us there,
I know.
She knows, she's a historian.
During the French, what we commonly call the French and Indian War, which could be considered the First World War. It was between France and England.
But it was everywhere.
It was everywhere. That's why I call it a world war, right? So it was like spread out through all, and a lot of it had to do with their expansionism into other, and taking lands. Anyways, so French and Indian War, one of the things that they decided to do was to tax the colonists. So it was the main reason that the war came about was over territory and trade routes.
Okay, so Hoovervilles, President Hoover, and it was the other political party basically trying to make fun of him. So a Hoover blanket would have been a newspaper, and a Hooverville was like a shanty town. And this has to do, during the Great Depression time frame. And so you had across the different spots across the U.S., St. Louis, San Francisco, even in Washington, D.C., there was an encampment of poor. An encampment so large that in 1932, they had what the papers called the Bonus Army. The Bonus Armies. So the Bonus Army was service members from World War I that were offered or guaranteed bonuses based off of their combat time, and they were living in Hoovervilles, and the Hoovervilles were basically shanty towns, whether they be tents or all kinds of stuck together houses. But in the area of Anacostia Bowling in the Washington D.C. area, there was a Hooverville there. There's pictures that are available from the Library of Congress that you can go look them up. But they marched on D.C., the service members and their families. I think it was somewhere around 40,000 people.
Wow.
They wanted their money.
Well, yeah, right?
And it was because of the Great Depression. So when the Great Depression hit, all these people were poor, and they're like, we earned our money. U.S. government, where's our money? Okay, so what's interesting to know about that is that the march was put down by Douglas MacArthur. I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
So Army, cavalry with tanks cleared those people out. I don't know what happened with the payments and all those things, but it was bad enough to where they needed to bring in U.S. troops to remove them.
The cavalry, they were using bayonets in the shanty towns to get the people out as well. Okay, so I do know a little bit then about that. I know they were using, so not only were they trying to stop the march, then using the army to push it back, but then even after they had went back to their camps, they Hoover said, get them out of the camps too. And so he had the army go into the camps, which were on private property. So it was actually, it was private property. It's like, no, so they got them because there was a couple of different camps. One was on what's 12th and Constitution. Okay. Which was, and so they had a camp there, and then they had the other camp that you were talking about, and that one was on private property. Yeah. And so the people moved from the public area. Okay. And everybody kind of like retreated back down and to the private property, and Hoover said, no, I don't want them there either.
Get them out.
Get them out, because between him and then he was going to veto. Like he said, if the House and the Senate and the House passed the bill to pay these people their bonus money, he was going to veto it.
Really?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So he
gave the girl an assignment to read some homework, and she did it.
I know. So he was going to veto it.
Yeah.
And so he number one, he didn't want to pay anybody. He didn't want, and he wanted the army to. He didn't care what happened to him. He's like, get rid of him.
Yeah.
So MacArthur, there was one. I believe there was like one casualty. There ended up being a casualty because they were pushing them back with bayonets. So they were using violence, tear gas and bayonets was what they used, and all these people, all they wanted was they were poor and they just wanted their money that they were told that they were supposed to receive.
Just wanted to be able to survive.
They just wanted to survive, and on monies that were promised to them, if you go to do this, we will give you this money, and they were not doing it.
So what I don't know, I mean, I know about this historical event, but it's a lot like other events that occur in history. We kind of hear about a little bit of the run-up, the bang, but we don't really hear like the post.
Oh, I got that for you
after.
too.
You know, I'm glad you know, because I only know that the things occur.
Anyways, that's why they called them. That's why they called them the bonus army. It was because they wanted their bonus money.
Yep.
So it went. So they still were not paid through Hoover, and then who came after Hoover? I don't know. Anyways, it passed. They did. I do believe they did get their bonus during the next administration. They got their bonuses, and the president at that time threatened to veto it as well.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, that was FDR.
Okay, so FDR was going to veto it as well.
Really? How about that? Hoover served from 29 to 33.
4 years later, in 1936, the veterans did get their bonus when Congress voted the money over President Franklin Roosevelt's veto.
Oh.
So then in 1944, World War II began, or World War II, in 1944, World War II was still raging. Congress passed the GI Bill to assist veterans in receiving higher education.
Yep.
So
instrumental in changing America.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But they did not want to give them their bonuses after they were promised that. I mean, all of that, and it took them marching over years and years and years
to finally get it. Well, I don't think that's the first time though. Historically, when you talk about like the Revolutionary War, the Tea Party and the no taxation without representation, but what got us there, you know?
I know.
She knows, she's a historian.
During the French, what we commonly call the French and Indian War, which could be considered the First World War. I mean, it was between France and England.
But it was everywhere.
It was everywhere. That's why I call it a world war, right? So it was like spread out through all, and a lot of it had to do with their expansionism into other, and taking lands. Anyways, so French and Indian War, one of the things that they decided to do was to tax the colonists. So it was the main reason that the war came about was over territory and trade routes, and the trade route was the Ohio Trading Company was a big part of it, and that was actually a conglomerate of a lot of like governors and businessmen who owned that, and they wanted to protect their trade route. And so we ended up with the French and Indian War because it was between France and England, and the colonists, but England at the time, because we were an English colony at the time. And they needed a way to pay for it. So that's where we started. So the people did not have an option. And they said, okay, well, and unlike in England where they could, like a lot of the battles were paid by the lords, right?
Who had lots of money already.
Who had lots of money already. And also would be able to take out of their renters on, they could number one, they could say, I'm going to send these renters of mine, because they're part of my property. I could send them.
That's creepy.
I know. Well, and property, they live on the property. So they're like, I'm responsible for them.
They're vassals.
And now I'm going to send them to this. So they couldn't do that here, right? Yeah. Because we didn't have the lords with the lands like that.
Woohoo!
However, so they said, well, we'll tax them. Yeah. And then that's and the people didn't have any option. And so basically we were being taxed to maintain a trading company's trade routes. Okay, so that's kind of how that came about.
And it builds into...
But then it built into like they realized that they can get them to they could continue this taxation, and the people were not being represented. They couldn't say no to the taxation. Yeah. And so that's where we get the taxation without representation.
Hey, Editing Jodie here. I want to add in to the taxation without representation. So they continue to do these taxes, and they continue to add more taxes, and they were not being represented in Parliament, in the English Parliament. So that's where the representation, so they continue to be taxed without the representation from the English Parliament. Taxation without representation. People were pissed. And then, that kind of helped fuel the fury of the revolution. There's a bit more, but that was the main part of it.
And then they said no to the taxation.
And then they said no to the taxation.
Yeah, and George Washington put the foot down.
Well, yeah.
Him and others.
And others, yeah. And actually, whenever you talk about, so even though he was our first president and he was involved in the Revolutionary War, quite, but it was as a military thing. But it was, really a bigger group that was come together. However, okay, so let me go back to monies owed.
Okay.
So what would happen is during this time, during the French and Indian War, they were taxing people, but then whenever which has actually happened many times in battles afterwards, including the Revolutionary War, is they relied on people to supply goods. So you had...
That makes me think about Carlisle for the French and Indian War, but also Benjamin
Franklin.
Yeah, because Benjamin Franklin coordinated for caissons or wagons ho, amongst the farmers and tradesmen, so that General Braddock could actually march out and fight the French.
Yes.
So those were all locals who had to give up some of their ability to transport grain or other goods, and they also gave up their people,
their drivers.
Their drivers. So they would, donate's probably not a great word. The English government agreed to pay them for that stuff.
And not everybody, and during this time it was very stressful for the people who would pay, they're basically fronting. They were pretty much fronting the money for it, and they then to get repaid for anything. So whenever we're talking about Major Carlisle, who was in charge of the commissary, so he was responsible for making sure the troops were fed or obtaining the supplies to send to the troops, and he had to come back and just after they had to put their bill in, they're okay, or their invoice, and they had to invoice the government, and they're well, when we get money.
Yeah, so that's funny. It makes me think of freaking health insurance because they're no, pay the bill and then submit your claim to us.
I'm I have $40,000 to do that.
And if we're okay with it, then we'll approve it.
Right.
But if not, but that's something for me, going to the doctor, it's something for me. The federal government today doesn't operate like that. We cannot spend funds without the allocation. So the money has to exist today for us to spend it. And in the past, we didn't operate like that. We spent money, and then in the federal government, we have to have approval. It's got to be positive to spend versus negative.
Well, currently, when we talk to, and that's the way it's supposed to be, right? And because we got away from the whole, in that respect, the IOU part, right? Oh yeah, go ahead and do it. However, this kind of relates to what's kind of happening currently, and the cancellation, and Doge canceling a lot of contracts and just not paying the contractors for the already produced work. The contractors did this work according to the contract with the federal government, and they canceled the contracts and they were not paying it. You were talking to.
So they're not necessarily executing the rest of the funds or the appropriate amount of funds. So they close the contract, and then and of course I don't know the legality behind closing a contract.
And that's So just to let you know, for instance, there was a company down in Georgia. So one of the ways that USAID was sending aid was these little packets of peanut butter.
Okay.
So they were this.
Like MRE peanut butter.
Like MRE, but it was being sent supplying nutrition for like however millions of kids. Okay,
Yep.
and number one, so now
Peanut farmers in America.
Peanut farmers down in Georgia.
Yep.
Right. So you're using a company out of Georgia to
Yep.
create the peanut butter and the packaging. So now we're talking about they stopped the funds, or they stopped the payment to that company. So the companies are making the peanut butter packets. And based on this is our
request,
our contractual agreement.
Yep.
They provided their end of the contract.
Yep.
And then because of Doge and President Musk, they stopped the payments.
I don't go on political tirades.
I don't work for the government. They stopped the funds. Now, what had happened was they were not getting funded for it. It took a news article and an investigation and it going out, and they're like,
to get the traction.
To get the traction for it.
So you had to have like public knowledge.
So it was a social push, and so I feel like that's kind of like where they were with
after the French and Indian War,
or even the Hoovervilles.
Oh yeah, even the Hoovervilles. So it's like a recurring theme, but I feel like we're getting better. We got to be getting better. Right?
Well, I thought we were.
I thought we were too,
Yeah.
So hopefully this block just won't last as long.
Right. But do you feel like that this could be something over the next 4 years or 2 years? 2 years we have in another like midterm elections.
Yeah. So I don't know. I'm not.
Okay, you don't have to make the guess on that. I'm hoping that it doesn't last more than 2 years, right? So I could see that these next 2 years will be pretty rough, because then we'll have midterm elections, and that's the opportunity for the public to help change.
Yeah, what's going on?
Change what's going on.
I'm only laughing because I just need the government to stay operational through Wednesday.
Thursday's the 13th. Friday's the 14th. It's through the 14th.
I'm talking about me, not them. I need them to stay operational until I leave the country.
On the 13th.
On the 13th. Just taking a little trip. Yeah. And I don't want to get stuck because, I don't know, just America in general, right? It has pissed off somebody, and now we can't travel.
And we're already out of the country, and we can't come back in.
Well, I want to be able to start traveling before they tell us we can't travel.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I want to do. It'll be fun.
I see that there's that connection. So it happened from, almost 300 years ago to, or, 275 years ago to, again, like again in the 1930s, so 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it happened I'm sure it happened in between then as well, to when it's happening again now. Hopefully not in that grand of a scale, but it has been pretty rough.
Yeah.
And so I'm hoping that lesser, and that we're as a country learning instead of trying to revert back into actions.
It is arguable that America, although the people came together to create freedom, and the Constitution is a fantastic document, and it has its flaws. Clearly needed the first 10 amendments, because there were definitely lots of problems with it. Those were all wealthy white men.
Yes.
And I'm not saying that that's a positive thing, but I'm saying that those were oligarchs of their time. George Washington had extensive lands across Virginia. He started collecting land when he was like 16.
Yes. He started as a surveyor whenever he was 13. So his father died. His brothers, they were his half-brothers actually. His half-brothers, two older brothers, had inherited most of like the bigger land. So when you talk about Mount Vernon, his older brother had owned it, and actually his older brother is the reason why they called it Mount Vernon. Anyways, Washington ended up inheriting this smaller property where he lived with his mother, which is in Fredericksburg, well, outside of Fredericksburg. It's in what we now call a fairy farm. And then so then at a young age,
they need chocolate syrup fairy lives.
It's where the fairy farm, and because they kind of needed, he was going to join the Navy, and his mom pretty much said, "Don't join the Navy. They're not going to treat you right." And so that's when he became a surveyor. Through connections, he became a surveyor at a very young age, and started checking out the land and was starting to accumulate his land that way. So you are absolutely correct. I just wanted to give a little backstory of how he started accumulating that land.
Yeah, and then of course Lemony Snicket's are a series of unfortunate events. Both of his older brothers pass away, and he inherits the kit and caboodle. But George Washington was land rich and cash poor, so he couldn't spend a lot of money. And
that's why and that's one of the fortunate things about him marrying Custis.
Yeah.
Because she was a widow. She's a widow, and she had money from her husband who had passed. That's where the two children were from. That's where she inherited. She had money, so she was rich. He was land rich. She was monetary rich.
He was also a bit of a dandy.
He
liked his clothes.
He had his clothes made, especially his uniforms. So whenever he wanted uniforms fit in, so he didn't have local uniform. He sent his measurements to a tailor in England. He had his certain ways that he wanted to do things, and he had the finances to do it.
Yeah, he did. It's interesting. We had a group of people who were in a position of extreme power and authority, and they could have done anything. And instead they created the pathway. They didn't create perfection, but they created a pathway towards perfection. And they saw a community moving forward together. They were progressive, maybe. How do we do this better? How do we become a more perfect union? How do we improve? And it's terrible that we are backsliding.
Yeah, and I would like to, so I'm just going to put a little plug in here. So if you want to learn more about during the time of the beginnings of the French and Indian War, I did happen to write 3 books about it.
Yeah. They're good stories too.
They're good stories, but it is fiction. I do have a time traveler going back, but you could kind of see some of the reasonings of why, and I do go into a little bit of that, but that's my short little plug. My link to my website is down below. Go click it, go buy a book. Digital's for right now, unless you're watching this years from now. Right now in 2005, the ebook.
2005?
2005?
Where the fuck you at?
I write time travel.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I am a time traveler.
Yeah. Or 2025.
Yeah.
If you happen to read, currently the ebook for the first book is 99 cents.
That's cool beans.
From my website, or which you can download to any of your e-readers or your favorite e-reader app.
And the audiobook's freaking amazing too. Our narrator is chef's kiss.
Yeah, and I'm going to be putting that on my YouTube soon. But I would prefer you go buy it from my website.
Yeah, if you want to know more about it, it'll be right here.
One of the things, that we do need to realize that this group of men that wrote the Constitution, the amendments.
The Articles of Confederation, which ones you want?
So any one of those was not based on religion.
Oh, yeah.
So I do want to say that too. So, and actually that's mentioned in my books as well, is the fact that many of the men were deists. So some of them did believe in like traditional Christian belief system, right? But some of them just believed in a higher being. They didn't know what that meant. Was that the universe? Was that whatever, whatever that higher being was? And some of them didn't really believe in any of it. But they just kind of they had to, they just had to kind of go with the flow.
Yeah.
So whenever we say that, this Constitution, and I think it's relevant because right now when we're talking about progression, we moved away from having a government with religious influence.
Yes, we did. We did move away from a government having religious influence.
From the moment they wrote that Constitution, even though they said God, and that was basically not meaning the Christian God. It was whatever you're kind of like this belief. A greater being, right? That's important whenever we're talking about, I think that's important when we're looking at the history of where we were and the progression to where we should be going and versus regression, right? So we shouldn't be going back to these things. We're supposed to be moving forward as a society. So whenever we're talking about the Hoovervilles, when we're talking about making sure people are getting their payment, when we're saying like, oh, well, constitutionally wise, this wise, that wise, and all that was written with the idea of progression, not regression.
Yeah. So I had a personal perception, and it colors the way I see things now. I mean, it continues to color the way I see things, even though I don't want it to. And that is that the people who came to the Americas, in the 1700s, that they were all very puritanistic, that they were like Puritan, that they were all highly religious. And I think it's kind of the imagery that we had from our childhood. And I think about the Ichabod Crane cartoon, from Disney. And the way they dressed, their mannerisms, everything was supposed to be just so.
That's not necessarily true. I mean, yes, that was the image that we were.
That was the image that was painted to us, but that's not accurate.
One of the things that we were taught in school was that people left England for religious freedom. So that is partially true. Yes, I can trace my family back to the Mayflower, but I do know
it's a crooked line.
One of the things that we know, so yes, there were people that wanted to be more strict with some of their religious beliefs, but there was also people looking, because times were tough in England at that time as well, and they wanted an opportunity to have their own space in their own land. When we're talking about that time, people really couldn't own, it was all owned by the lords, and you were only renters. So one of the opportunities for them to be able to expand and own their own was to come to the colonies and to establish themselves here. And so, yes, so some people were doing it because they wanted to practice their religion a little bit differently. Many people, it was about being able to have something that they could call their own in that respect.
So a little bit more just liberty.
Yes, what it was. It was about having that liberty. Now, that's not to say that they still did not treat people very well.
Yeah. Early America was not this perfect Puritan society where everyone was polite to everyone, and where all the movies are made where they're like kind of in these perfect environments,
Right. And if you think about there's the book, The Scarlet Letter, written by Nathaniel Hawthorne, right? So the woman was pregnant, and she had to wear the Scarlet Letter because they're like, oh, your husband's not here. That child that you have could not possibly be your husband's. Yep. And it wasn't. But that was kind of like shows like some of what could happen. That just goes to show that the way people behave with each other now and the way they behaved then was the same. It's just, number one, what was written about and who they focused at who's going to be the bad guy. So it was obviously the woman, even though it was like...
Y'all are so evil.
Of course we are. It continues to, and in one of my books, so I talk about, and this is just an example, we have our main character who's walking with these women on their way to a battle. And their conversation is kind of, I don't want to say crude, right? But it's kind of like what you would not expect from women. At that time.
I imagine a group of enlisted wives.
But
hanging around, they'll get you.
But I think, but one of the things that I say is, I don't want people like clutching their pearls, go like, well, those women would never speak like that. No, actually, they would.
Yeah.
They would. It's just like that stuff wasn't written down. So the prim and proper might have been written down, but the actual that type of conversation, I bet your husband's great or whatever. That kind of information, that kind of like vulgar talk was something that would have been common. It's just that we don't think that right now. We think like, oh no, the women were prim and proper, but heck,
it wasn't like as if it weren't accepted.
Right, and it was. I mean, that's just... Yeah.
So George Washington was very big on polite society.
Yes.
So it was definitely something that might not have been seen in polite society, but it doesn't mean that it didn't exist.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say that it was necessary. Even those women were probably discussing the same type of things. However, but whenever you're talking about being in company of things, so there was obviously, like, you had very regimented, like, this is the proper, like, conversation, and this is the proper this, and this is the proper that, when you're in type of those events. And you're right, you've read.
I have a copy of it.
His list of like, you know, like drinking, like his, like what he considered like his rules of
decorum.
But it wasn't that.
Not what it's called. I don't remember. It was actually one of the first things he learned to write. It was his writing. You know, he was writing that.
Yeah.
You know, I think is very funny is Jodie can talk about stuff, but then she struggles sometimes with saying other stuff. Where she's tell me about your husband. What do you mean, tell me about your husband? You're trying to describe the ladies walking.
Oh.
And you're like, and they, you know, they say things, and I'm like, just say fuck. Which is so weird, because sometimes you're like, those motherfuckers, I'm gonna kill them. And other times you're like, I can't say that.
Well, okay, so in my book, I do not use the word fuck.
No.
So that's, I think that's why I did not go there. I was trying to think of like how I worded it exactly. There's a lot of
She's trying to remember the exact line?
Maybe, or like, or say, you know, I just think that one of the women said he must be good in like
must
bed.
Be good in bed?
Yeah. I didn't say fuck because in my book, like, there's no sex on screen. There's no, like, there's very mild language.
Cheese and rice.
Cheese and rice.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So that's why I didn't use fuck. Fuck is my favorite word, though.
And this is the part of the video where I ask you to like, subscribe, and follow along. And don't forget to leave a comment below.